Hello everybody, welcome to another tutorial with me, Daniel Detweiler. This time it will be really interesting because we are comparing how a drum sound that we mix digital in the box with sound compared to when we mix it analog on the KDEC board and with outboard. Because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about the difference between mixing in analog and mixing in digital. Both ways have advantages, but both systems also have some downside. I've prepared a bass drum, snare, overhead, just really basic, because if it's too many tracks, it won't be really possible to compare. Let's quickly hear it in digital and analog. At the moment with minimal plugins, so basically you just hear the rough tracks. This will be first the analog version, then I switch to the digital version. No plugin, no outboard, just flat. Now the digital version. Let's do it again. So just that it's really clear, with digital version, I mean that the four mics that we hear are mixed together in Pro Tools in the box. Analog version at the moment means the four microphones are mixed on the KDEC board together. We then go back to Pro Tools, so you hear this analog mix over my AD conversion, obviously because I cannot show it how it sounds purely analog. So you hear it again with the AD conversion. Okay, again, let's start with the digital version this time, and then I switch to the analog version. And analog. Can you hear the difference? Do you think the difference is big? I cannot really hear any difference here, because honestly, if you just mix together four tracks, to me there is no difference to mix that thing analog or to mix it digital. In contrary, if you mix it analog, just four microphones without anything that you do, then it's a waste of a DA conversion and AD conversion, because you go out through four DAs, that will give you some mistakes. Then you mix it analog. I personally think you have no benefit mixing four tracks analog. Then you go back to an AD converter, so there's not much benefit. Let's now see what happens if we start to do some processing. And for that, I would like to just start with the overhead. We do some digital processing, and then we try to do the same as close as we can with analog gear. Let's go on. Let's give some EQing, and let's do this with this plugin by SoundToys, the CQ, which I think is quite a good plugin. And let's just do this real quick and real easy. So the goal of this lesson is not to get the most ultimate drum sound ever. The goal would be to really show you the difference about analog tools and digital tools. So let's just add 15 dBs of bass. Let's just add a lot of highs, and let's add a little bit of upper mids. We will show you this setting later. I make a quick screenshot. So that sounds like this. Let's do the same thing analog. We have the same equalizer, the original equalizer in the rack. That's this beautiful thing here. The setting is already, I think we do maximum highs, or if not, I change it. And we give, let's give 2 steps of upper mids. So this is the, basically, that's the original after this EQ, the CEQ is modeled. So let's go in here and let's go out. We said we have maximum highs 2 and 2 steps of upper mids. Let's compare it. analog version. And digital version. The analog version, the stereo image is not quite correct, so let's quickly fix this. It's important actually to try to level match it as good as you can, because if one thing is louder and one is softer, it's more difficult to compare. And if you use analog gear, you have to do the gain staging. Let's see if that's right. Digital is still a little bit louder. Obviously, the plugin doesn't behave exactly the same as the analog thing, but I think we are close enough. So let's start with the digital version, 4 or 3 bars, and then I switch. You will see when I switch to the analog thing. So this still sounds quite close, but I think you already can hear it's not totally the same. Let's now add some compression, and why not add the 11D, the CLA 67 on the digital one. I go to bluish so that it does a little bit more. And actually, an important thing, if you compare plugins to analog outboard, I feel that the difference is bigger if the plugin or the outboard has to do really a lot. If kind of you bring the analog hardware to its limit, then usually it starts to sound interesting. And let's see if this is the same with the plugin. Let's maybe first start with the analog version. Let's not make it too fast. Okay, that's good. Okay, let's compare now the overhead signal with the digital EQ and the digital version of the 76 and the analog version. We start with the digital. And analog. Digital. Might make the digital a little bit louder. Okay, I think here with equalizer and the compression you already start to hear it, although with the plugin it doesn't sound really bad, but I feel it sounds more lively, more punchy with the original 78. That's also my experience with that compressor. You can really hit it hard, but you still hear the attack phase of the bass drum and the snare. With the plugin, either you do the attack phase, you make it longer the time, but then it's too long, or then you make it shorter, but then it's too shorter. It's kind of more difficult to get it right. Let's now do quickly a bass drum sound. Okay, let's do some equalizing. Why not? We could use this Shep's EQ. Again, let's just do too much, basically. Let's give a little bit of something here. Let's give some saturation. Now let's do something similar with, let's take the EQ from the desk, because it sounds quite similar. Let's not use that one. Let's look what we have. Let's look if we are close. Analog version, then the digital version. Let's give a little bit more. We should maybe make this one higher because we are higher with the codec on that one. So maybe with that we are closer. Digital version. Analog version. Now we can try to even give more on both systems. So that's now the new analog version with even more, so we overdid it. And on the digital, let's see what also, this one is not used, what also happens if we overdo it. Okay, digital version. And analog. And it's very clear that you never can match it totally. Also here we have codec EQ analog and the digital EQ. However, they kind of are similar. I actually think here the digital version of the bass drum is absolutely okay with that plugin. Still, I feel there is a little bit more life in the analog EQ, which is something I always have to experience. And let's now compress it. Let's again take, to simplify it, the same compressor as before, the 76. Let's take the blue version. Let's try to get something nice. It's way too loud. That's fine for now. Let's try to do something similar on the analog version. Okay. Let's see if we are somehow close. Digital. And it's interesting because the analog version sounds as it would be a little bit slower from the release, while however it's actually not. And now the analog version is a little bit louder, and as we anyway have a lot of input at the moment on the analog compressor, I will just bring the level on the send to the desk a little bit down, so I'll have a little bit less compression. Then maybe it sounds more similar. And the digital version, we can make it a little bit louder. Analog, digital, I can make it even more louder. Analog. So whatever you try to do, usually that nice slap on the bass drum. So we have a lot of attack, but also a lot of fatness, a lot of power. It's usually something that it's way more easy to do with analog systems. In digital systems, obviously you can do some things to actually compete with that, to give the saturation of the box, because that's something it's difficult to emulate, but you could just use on the digital now decapitators or Saturn, which is the saturation plugin from FabFilter. Let's just try to give a little bit of that one. And as you can see, that thing here actually brought our digital sound a lot more close to the analog sound. So actually what was missing in the this little compressor plugin of the CLA76 is not so much only the behavior or whatever it is. It's just that it's really difficult to emulate the saturation, the chaotic behaviors that happens. And so very often in digital, it's just a great idea to combine EQs, compressors, but then also have a saturation plugin. Then you can really control the saturation. So actually now we are not so far away. Let's go to the snare drum. Let's do something similar. We take the Sheps EQ, as I really like that thing on snare. Okay, let's do the same thing on the desk. EQ here. Let's right away overdo it. Let's do too much. Let's do more. Okay, let's really over equalize it. We really add a lot of highs on the desk without, with. Okay, let's now see if we did as much on the digital EQ or if we have to do more. Now digital, it's not so far away. Let's do a little bit more. And now it's basically, I think, rather close. It's now softer on the digital version. Try to fix that. Now here you hear something that I often have the feeling that it happens. Actually, the highs sound a little bit harsh on many digital equalizer, and that's also kind of logic because harshness is in the frequency range of about 5K, and with a digital EQ, very often if you open up 5K, you also introduce harshness to your music. Why this is something that with a very good equalizer you usually don't have that problem so much. So in digital you have to look that if you open up something in the upper mids 3, 4, 5, 6Ks that you don't introduce harshness, or you might have to remove it later. Here I hear a little bit of harshness, while on the analog version I think it's smoother. There is as much top end, but it's nicer sounding. Let's compress it. Again, to simplify, let's just also use our plugin here. Let's try to make an aggressive snare sound. That's fine for now. Let's try if we can compete on the analog thing. And actually what happens now is something interesting. If you have it totally fast, like now, you have that typically slappy sound. But if you go a little bit slower, not totally slow, but just a little bit, like this. You have a more gorgeous sound. And this sound here is very difficult to get on the digital version. So basically not totally fast, but rather fast. So it's like a little bit a more slow clap. Let's see if we can match that one with the plugin. Digital version. Now I go also a little bit closer, a little bit slower. Analog. Digital. The digital version is softer again. Let's match the level. Now it's louder, the digital version. Maybe we have to compress a little bit more, but again, it's near impossible to match it exactly. I also have the feeling it's not important. You don't have to match it exactly, because normally you either mix with that plugins or you mix with the analog tools, and there is really no reason to match it exactly. But now for these little tests, we try to do it digital, analog, and we might have put in a little bit too much highs here in the shapes. But as you can clearly see, you cannot really match it completely. Let's now we have the overhead, we have the bass drum, we have a basic snare, we don't have any reverb, we don't need it. Let's now listen all together, see how that sounds. So this is our version digital. We hear in the bass drum, the snare, and the overhead. And the analog version. So let's now start to do some bus processing. So actually now we have a bus for both versions. So for the digital drum, I created a digital drum bus. I created an analog bus for the analog drum. Let me quickly show you what I did. On the digital version, we have this Puig Child plugin, and we have here a mastering equalizer that I thought was closest to actually this Tigi Curve Bender EQ and this nice Unfairchild. The compressor comes first, both on the analog and on the digital bus, because I thought the drum was rather cold sounding. It was recorded in a professional but rather small studio. If you would give a lot of basses before the mastering compressor would just compress this bass again, and then that doesn't sound nice. So I want to first have a compression and then the equalizer. I actually tried to match this EQ as close as I could to the Waves Puig Child version, and I tried to match the equalizer as close as I could get. Okay, let's now compare the two versions. I just switch, you will see when what is active. Okay, so I think here the difference is more clear. We are close. The analog version, I feel that there is a way more live. Or basically, if you try to listen in which version the drummer actually grooved more. I mean, obviously it's exactly the same version. However, listen to the groove of it. In the analog version, I actually always have the feeling that there is more of the groove, more of the emotion of whatever the musician intended to do it's more easy to get that analog than digital. Let's hear it again. It's a little bit more power in the analog version, like if the musician would just have played a little bit with more energy. But we are close, and as I said, what is missing on a lot of the plugins that emulating hardware is actually a really good saturation, and that's something you always could do if you mix digital, just add a little bit saturation. And a very good tool for this is the front DAW. Let's just throw this on it. I know in the actual version they also have an output slider to basically change the output gain a little bit. For now we have to do it manually. Let's add a little bit more level to the digital version. Okay, now I think you have the same experience like I have. The longer we are listening to both versions, the longer we are realizing that there is something in the digital version that stresses us just a little bit. I would actually like to go to the equalizer and reduce a little bit the high frequencies that we actually pushed in too hard. While on the analog version, I don't feel the need to get back. And as you all know, you're listening drum solo now, but with the electric guitar, the E-bass that this song would have at the end of the mix, we actually need this high frequency push in the drums. And it's my feeling with an analog equalizer, if you choose the right one, you can get those high frequencies, you can get some bass frequencies, and it's just like if it was played with more of those frequencies on the stage. While with digital, it always sounds a little bit as, yeah, we added something and it is there, the highs are there on the digital version, but it hurts us a little bit while listening. And this is just a difference that is actually really true. And the more channels we would use on the analog board, if you have 60 channels, which in a final mix you would have, then actually these advantages of the niceness, the smoothness of the analog system actually sums up, because it's subtle on one channel. It's already not so subtle on the 4th channel with a bus, and it's even less subtle if you have 60 channel. Then it's really a difference. So if I can choose whether I mix digital or analog, I always choose combination of the two, because what also have to be said, if you have to make some corrections to filter out room resonances or bad tones in the drum, then actually digital EQs are way better, hands down. I would not want to make a precise cut with an analog equalizer. I wouldn't see any benefit. However, whatever I have to construct, if I have to give character, and in today's recording, that's something you often have to give as a mixer, character. This works just way better with analog gear. And in the end of a mix and a mastering, the differences are not subtle. The downside, however, is you cannot automate this analog processing, this analog units, and automation is something great with plugin. Now, whether a digital mix or an analog mix at the end is better, it obviously depends also on the engineer, it depends on the project. At the moment, a lot of engineers, top-end engineers, are going to mix in the box, and yes, of course, it can be done. I have myself actually started as an in-the-box mixers for 15 years. I wouldn't have a problem to do in-the-box mixes again, but if I can, I would use the analog equipment. And now a lot of these extremely top-notch Grammy-winning mixers like Andrew Schöps or also Michael Brower that go in the box now, you have also to understand that they get top-notch recorded tracks, which we as normal mixers not always get. I'm in the luxury position to get sometimes really great tracks, but not always. Sometimes a band records in the band room and then there is no character there. And Andrew Schöps actually said something really funny. He said that he doesn't want to mix anymore with analog gear because of Total Recall and other reasons. However, he fully understands the need of great compressors and equalizers on the recording stage because there it's really about sound. And yes, if you work that way, as I said before, character in the music has to come from somewhere. If it comes from the recording stage, well, great. And then you could choose if you want to mix analog or digital. However, if it's recorded in a band room, the character cannot be there because the character is not coming through a cheap microphone, a cheap preamplifier, and a cheap AD converter. No chance. So basically, an analog studio like here, you could see as basically a studio that re-records the boring tracks. So we go into the microphone preamplifiers, which we also do now for this drum sound because it sounds better. It goes into a really great microphone preamplifier, into an EQ, into a compressor. And then at the end, you can mix it analog or you can just re-record stems back into Pro Tools and then sum it digitally. To me, for what I hear, it's not so much about the summing, although analog summing is great, moreover if you do jazz. But in pop music, whether you sum digital or analog, for me, it's not so much the difference. For me, the difference is all together. So if I leave Pro Tools to go to the analog domain, then I want to do a lot in the analog domain. And then all the advantages, they sum up, and at the end, very often the result is clearly 1 or 2 steps better than if I would only mix in the box. So that was it for this tutorial. Ring the bell, subscribe to the channel. Go to my homepage, danieldetweiler.com, if you want to be informed once we have a really large tutorial about mixing. That will be a paid tutorial, but not expensive. See you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Shades of the light, cocoa hue, rich as the night, afro blue. Two young lovers are face to face with undulating grace. They gently sway and slip away to Psalms accrued place. La le bromo bie miningo fredina mukungo briene